I didn't get fired. That's what makes it hard to explain without sounding dramatic. After 19 years at the same company, people assume you either retire there or you get walked out with a cardboard box. Mine was quieter, cleaner, the kind of quiet that can ruin your life without ever making a scene. It started with a calendar invite from our new Vice President of Operations, Derek Collins. 10 minutes, no agenda, a catch-up. I almost declined. I had client escalations, audit prep, a backlog that never truly went away. But when a VP asks, you show up. That was the deal I'd lived by for almost 2 decades. Be reliable, be steady, be the person who makes problems disappear. When the call opened, my director Laura was already there, smiling too quickly. HR was there too, Ben from People Ops. Camera on, hands folded, neutral in the way only HR can be. Derek started with compliments. You've been a cornerstone, he said. Institutional knowledge. Consistent performer. We're grateful. The words landed like soft padding in a room you suspect has sharp corners. Then he said, We're not letting you go. We're just realigning your role to match the new operating model. I remember the way Laura nodded before I even spoke, like she'd practiced the movement. What does realigning mean? I asked. Derek didn't blink. Reduced management layers, faster execution, cost efficiency. I'd heard those phrases in every reorg since the early 2000s. They were always followed by one thing. Someone lost something. He kept talking, steady and pleasant, as if he was explaining a weather forecast. My team, 6 people I'd hired, trained and protected from bad politics, was being moved under a new manager. My title would remain, for now. My responsibilities would shift to support and advisory. Support, advisory. No decision-making, no approvals, no direct reports. I waited for the part where they named the problem I'd caused, the mistake I'd made, the performance concern that justified dismantling my role. It never came. I asked one question, carefully. What problem are we solving by removing my ownership? Derek smiled like I'd asked something naive. We're solving for the future. Ben from HR finally spoke. This isn't punitive. It's an opportunity to refocus your strengths. Laura added, You'll have more flexibility, less managerial overhead. That was the first time I felt the shape of it. They weren't firing me because firing creates obligations, severance policies, unemployment claims, messy paperwork, a story people can repeat. But if they could make me leave on my own, it would be clean, voluntary, efficient. Derek wrapped it up with a final gentle line. We want you here. We just need you aligned. Aligned, another word that meant, stop resisting what we're doing to you. When the call ended, I sat at my desk and stared at my inbox like it might explain what had just happened. 2 minutes later, an email hit from Laura, following up with next steps. Attached was a document titled Role Clarification. 2 pages, polite language, surgical. It listed everything I would no longer do, approve vendor exceptions, sign off on access requests, represent the department in escalations, own the audit control narrative. The work that made me valuable was being peeled off and reassigned, 1 line at a time. The last paragraph looked harmless until you read it twice. Employee is expected to demonstrate flexibility regarding location and hours as business needs evolve. I'd been remote 2 days a week for years. Most of my team lived out of state. Derek was based in another time zone. But suddenly my role required flexibility. I forwarded the document to my personal email, then stopped, deleted it, and sent it to myself properly through the approved system, because 19 years had taught me what gets questioned later. Then I created a folder on my work laptop and named it something boring. Project Notes. Inside, I saved the meeting invite, the role document, Laura's email. I opened a blank document and typed the date, the names on the call, and exactly what Derek said while it was still fresh. It felt paranoid, like I was turning into someone I didn't recognize. But by Thursday, I didn't feel paranoid anymore. That was when my access started changing. Not shut off. Not dramatic. Just narrowed. The finance dashboard I used for vendor spend forecasting was suddenly behind a permission group I didn't have. The approval queue I'd managed for years now required Laura's sign-off. A tool I used for audit evidence had moved into a new workspace owned by the incoming manager. I opened a ticket for access restoration. Routine. Clean. It got denied within an hour. Reason. Role updated. No one said the word demotion. No one had to. I walked into Laura's office with my laptop open and the denial on the screen. I need this access to do what you're asking me to do, I said. She didn't look at the screen. Let's let the new model breathe for a bit. I can't validate anything without the tools, I replied. Laura exhaled like I was inconveniencing her. We're all adjusting. Try to be flexible. Flexible. Again. When I went back to my desk, I looked at my team's chat and saw one of my engineers asking, "Do we still route escalations through you?" I typed the honest answer, then erased it. I didn't want to scare them, not yet. So I wrote, "For now, keep following the documented process. I'll update you if anything changes." Then my phone buzzed, a new calendar invite from Ben in HR, 10 minutes, no agenda. A check-in. I sat there with my hands on the keyboard, and for the first time in my career, I felt something heavier than anxiety settle in my chest. Recognition. They weren't removing me in one move. They were adjusting the conditions around me. Access, authority, location, expectations. Until staying would feel impossible, and leaving would feel like my idea. I opened my project notes document again and added one sentence at the bottom. They didn't fire me. They started building the version of my job I couldn't survive. And that's when I understood the real danger. If I handled this like an emotional betrayal, I'd lose. If I handled it like an audit, dates, evidence, control failures, I might walk out with my name intact. Because the next thing they were going to ask for wouldn't be my resignation. It would be my signature. By the time the second week started, I realized something that made my stomach turn. They weren't trying to make me quit by being cruel. They were trying to make me quit by making me look unreasonable. Because cruelty leaves fingerprints. But reasonable business needs can be defended in a conference room with a PowerPoint. Monday morning, Ben from HR called it a wellness check-in. Same 10 minutes. Same blank agenda. He asked, "How are you feeling about the transition?" Not how the work was going. Not what access I needed. Not whether client risk was increasing. Just how I was feeling. Like my emotions were the problem we were managing. "I'm focused on performing," I said. "I need my access restored and the expectations aligned to my actual responsibilities." Ben nodded slowly, like he was taking in something delicate. "I hear you," he said. "We just want to make sure this is still a good fit for you." There it was again, dressed up as concern. "If you're unhappy, you can leave." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply said, "This is a good fit when the role is real. Right now, the role is being stripped while I'm still being held accountable for outcomes." Ben smiled in that way HR does when they're trying to close a door without looking like they're closing it. "I'll share the feedback," he said. He never replied again. That afternoon, Derek announced the new operating model in a department-wide meeting. Big smiles, big words. He talked about speed and agility and removing bottlenecks. People clapped because clapping is what people do when they're afraid of being noticed, not clapping. Then he introduced the new manager who would lead my old team, Kyle. Kyle was smart, eager, and hungry in the exact way you get when someone offers you a chair that still has another person's warmth in it. Kyle thanked Derek, thanked Laura, then looked right at me and said, "I'm excited to learn the systems you've built." Systems, not relationships, not judgment, not experience. Just systems, like I was a manual he could skim. Right after the meeting, Kyle invited me to a knowledge transfer series, 3 sessions a week, mandatory. On paper, it looked collaborative. In reality, it was me training the person who was inheriting my responsibilities. While my title stayed the same, so nobody had to admit it was a demotion. I sat through the first session and kept my tone even. I explained vendor controls, escalation thresholds, audit evidence rules, and why certain shortcuts looked fine until regulators asked questions. Kyle took notes, nodded, asked good questions. Then near the end, he said something that made my hands go cold. "Oh, and Derek asked if you could start logging everything in the new tracker," he said. "We need volume metrics." Volume metrics. My work had never been about volume. It was about preventing disasters. You don't measure that with numbers unless you're trying to make it look like someone isn't doing enough, I said. The tracker requires access I no longer have. Kyle blinked, like he hadn't expected resistance. Really? That's weird. Let me check. He checked. He came back 10 minutes later with a cheerful message. "Yeah, looks like your permissions are restricted, probably temporary. In the meantime, just send me your updates and I'll enter them." I stared at that sentence for a long time, because it meant this: I would still do the work, but he would own the record of it. That's not a mistake. That's control. Well, the next day, Derek's email hit at the end of the afternoon. Subject line, updated performance expectations. It contained a list of targets that looked clean and professional until you read them as someone who understood the job. Close a specific number of tickets per week. Reduce cycle time. Increase logged activity. Deliver weekly summaries in a format Kyle controlled. Then the line that made my throat tighten. Failure to meet expectations may impact incentive eligibility. They were tying my pay to metrics that required tools I'd been blocked from using. I forwarded the email into Project Notes. I wrote down the time it arrived. I took a screenshot of the denied access tickets. Then I walked into Laura's office again. She didn't even pretend to be surprised this time. "This isn't realistic," I said calmly. "You've removed my access and my authority, and now you're measuring me on throughput like I'm a call center." Laura leaned back, eyes tired, voice soft, like she was talking to a difficult child. "This is the new model. Everyone is adapting." "Not everyone," I said. "Kyle has the access. The team has the tools. I'm the only one being asked to produce without what I need." Laura's expression tightened for half a second, then smoothed. "Look," she said, "no one is forcing you to stay." There it was. The sentence that wasn't supposed to sound like a threat, but did. I felt irritation rise, hot and sharp, the kind that makes people say something that gets labeled behavior, so I swallowed it. I nodded once. "Understood," I said. "I'll need everything in writing." Laura blinked. "You don't trust us?" I didn't say the obvious answer. Instead, I said, "I trust documentation." That night, I didn't sleep well. Not because I was panicking, because I was thinking. They wanted me to react, to snap, to send an angry email, to refuse tasks in a way they could frame as insubordination, to look like the problem. So the next morning, I answered Derek's expectations email with one paragraph, boring and precise. I acknowledge receipt. The listed metrics do not reflect my current responsibilities or the tool access available to perform them. I have submitted multiple access requests that were denied due to role changes. Please advise how you would like me to meet these expectations without the required systems. I attached the denied tickets. Then I waited. For an hour, nothing happened. My inbox stayed quiet. My phone didn't ring. And in that silence, I felt the first small shift inside me. The moment you stop hoping the system is fair and start accepting it's strategic. Then Derek sent the meeting invite. Title: Alignment. Attendees: Derek, Laura, me, no HR. And I knew what that meant. They were about to try pressuring me without witnesses. I stared at the invite, then typed my response before I could talk myself out of it. "I can attend with HR present. Please include Ben from People Ops." It was a small line, but it changed the game. Because if they truly believed they were being reasonable, they wouldn't mind a witness. 3 minutes later, the invite updated. Ben was added. Derek was fast. That worried me more than if he'd resisted. When I walked into the conference room, Derek didn't sit. He stood by the window, arms folded, like he was waiting to see whether I'd fold first. Ben opened his laptop. Laura sat with her hands clasped. Derek smiled. "We need to talk about your attitude." I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I just said, "My focus is on performing correctly with the tools required. If there are concerns, I'd like them tied to specific expectations and access." Derek's smile tightened. Laura added gently, "We're trying to help you succeed, but your tone is defensive." Defensive. Not wrong, not failing, defensive. And that's when I understood the real trap. If they couldn't fire me for performance, they would build a case around personality. They would turn my calm insistence on tools and accuracy into resistance. They would label documentation as lack of trust. They would paint professional boundaries as negativity. I sat there and felt the unfairness burn behind my ribs. Then I felt something else underneath it, clearer. They were constructing a story. And if I didn't control the record, I would become the villain in my own exit. So I did the only thing that gave me leverage. I stayed calm. "I want to succeed," I said. "Please restore the access required to meet the metrics you've assigned. Otherwise, these expectations cannot be validated." Derek stared at me for a beat, then said, "Take the afternoon. Come back ready to align." The meeting ended like that. No resolution, just pressure. I walked out, sat in my car, and stared at my hands on the steering wheel. And that's when I realized the truth that changed everything. They weren't trying to remove me from the company. They were trying to remove my credibility first, because once I looked like the problem, they could do whatever they wanted. That night, I opened my project notes folder and added one more section. Title: Forced Exit Pattern. Dates: Access Removal, Metric Changes, HR Language, Witnesses. I didn't know it yet, but that decision would cost them everything. Because the next thing they asked me to do wasn't going to be a training session. It was going to be an attestation, a signature. And once they pushed me to sign something I couldn't verify, their reasonable model would turn into a compliance problem. A real one. The next week, the pressure stopped, pretending it was about alignment, and started acting like a system. They didn't shout. They didn't threaten. They just changed small rules every day until the job I'd known for 19 years didn't exist anymore. Except I was still expected to carry it. Kyle's knowledge transfer sessions multiplied. He invited people I'd never met, new hires, contractors, a process analyst from another department, and each session followed the same pattern. I explained how we kept regulators off our backs, and Kyle translated it into something faster, thinner, and easier to measure. "Got it," he'd say, tapping his pen. "So we can simplify approvals." "No," I'd answer evenly. "We can streamline evidence collection. Approvals exist because we're a regulated business." Kyle would smile like I was being old-fashioned. Right. We'll keep it compliant." He said compliant the way people say safe when they're speeding. Meanwhile, the access requests stayed denied. I couldn't see the dashboards that proved our controls were working, but Derek's metrics email kept hovering over me like a countdown. Every morning, I'd open my inbox and feel the same calculation in my chest. Do I respond, or do I wait and let them frame my silence? So I stayed boring. I stayed factual. I kept records. Then on a Thursday afternoon, Kyle sent me a document with a one-line message. "Need your sign-off today. Audit deadline." The file name was familiar. Annual Vendor Attestation. I'd signed versions of it for years. It wasn't ceremonial. It mattered. Signing meant I was certifying that certain controls existed, that approvals were tracked, that exceptions were documented, that evidence could be produced on request. The kind of thing regulators ask for after something goes wrong. I opened the document and felt my stomach tighten because I knew immediately what the problem was. I could not verify any of it anymore. The controls were still tied to my name in the system, but the system itself was now behind permissions I didn't have. The evidence repository had moved. The approval queue belonged to Laura. The tracker belonged to Kyle, and they wanted my signature anyway. I stared at the signature line and felt a wave of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel yet. Betrayal, yes, but also a deeper kind of insult. They didn't want my experience. They wanted my liability. I wrote a reply, deleted it, rewrote it, then sent the simplest, cleanest version. I can review and sign once my access is restored to validate the statements. Please re-enable access or provide an approved alternative validation path through compliance. 5 minutes later, Kyle called. "We just need it done," he said, voice tight, like I was holding up a train. "You've done this forever." "That's why I'm not guessing," I replied. He tried a softer tone. "It's standard. Nothing changed." I looked at my project notes folder at the list of things that had changed. "A lot changed," I said. "My access did, my approvals did, my role did." Kyle exhaled. "I'll talk to Derek." An hour later, Derek emailed me directly. "Sign the attestation. This is a standard expectation." Standard. That word again, like if they said it enough, reality would flatten into compliance. I didn't respond immediately. I forwarded the email into my folder. I wrote down the time. I opened the access denial tickets and took screenshots. Then I did something I should have done weeks earlier. I called someone outside the building. I didn't start by searching for revenge. I searched for clarity. I asked a friend in another company, someone who'd been through a forced exit, if she knew an employment attorney who dealt with constructive discharge and retaliation. She gave me a name, Maya Patel. I booked a consultation for the next morning. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and tried to explain the situation to myself the way I'd explain risk to leadership, calmly, in bullet points, without emotion. But the emotion showed up anyway, because I realized the truth I'd been circling for days. They weren't managing me. They were managing the paper trail that would explain my departure. And if I signed that attestation, I would be helping them write the clean ending they wanted. I slept in short pieces. In the morning, Maya asked for facts, not feelings. So I sent facts. Performance reviews from the past few years. The role clarification document. Derek's metric expectations. My denied access tickets. The attestation email chain. She read everything, then said without drama, "This looks like constructive discharge." I'd heard the term before, but hearing it applied to my life made the air feel different. "They're not firing you," she said. "They're making conditions unreasonable, so you resign. That allows them to avoid severance obligations and control the narrative. The attestation request is especially concerning because it asks you to certify controls without access to verify them." "So what do I do?" I asked. Maya paused. "You stay calm. You stay employed. You stay accurate. You do not sign anything you cannot verify. And you do not let them redefine your professionalism as an attitude problem." Then she added something that landed like a hand on my shoulder. "You've been trying to be the good employee. That instinct is being used against you." That night, I stopped being the hero. I stopped trying to save them from their own mess. I started protecting myself. I responded to Derek with one paragraph and copied Laura and HR. I acknowledge the request. I cannot sign an attestation without access to validate the statements. Please restore access to the relevant systems or provide an alternative validation method approved by compliance. Without validation, signing would create risk. Ben from HR replied within minutes. "Let's discuss this," he wrote, and sent a meeting invite titled Performance Discussion. Performance, not compliance, not audit, not controls. Performance. They were already pivoting. In the meeting, Derek didn't mention the attestation first. He talked about team velocity and support posture, as if my refusal was emotional resistance instead of a legal and regulatory boundary. Then he leaned forward slightly and said, "Your refusal creates risk." I kept my voice level. "Signing without validation creates risk." Laura's eyes flicked to Ben's laptop. Ben typed faster. Derek narrowed his eyes. Do you understand how this looks? I did. Perfectly. It looked like the one thing they hadn't planned for. A person who would not break character. I understand, I said. It looks like you want my signature more than you want accuracy. The room went quiet for a beat, and in that beat, I felt something in me shift from endurance to clarity. They thought I was trapped because I cared about the job. They didn't realize I cared more about my name. Ben ended the meeting with corporate softness. We'll follow up with next steps. By late afternoon, those next steps arrived in my inbox as a conversation summary. It was written in careful language that made me sound difficult without accusing them of anything. It said I was not demonstrating flexibility and not aligning with expectations. It did not mention that they had removed my access and demanded an audit signature anyway. So I replied, boring, precise, undeniable. Thank you for the summary. For accuracy, please add that I requested access to validate the attestation. That access was not provided, and that my refusal was based on inability to verify required controls. Ben didn't answer, but an updated version arrived later with my wording inserted. A small win, permanent. Then, as I was packing up to leave for the day, another email hit from Kyle. Quick update, he wrote. Compliance wants to confirm control ownership for the vendor process. They're asking why your name is still listed. I stared at the message until the letters blurred slightly, because that meant the part Derek and Laura couldn't control was waking up. And once compliance and audit started asking questions, their quiet plans stopped being just an HR strategy. It became a risk event. I didn't know it yet, but the moment I refused that signature, calmly in writing, I forced them into a corner. And companies don't like corners. They don't always fire you from a corner. Sometimes they do something worse. They put you on a plan. They cut your access completely. They call it administrative, and they pretend it's for your benefit. The next morning, I walked into the office, badged in, sat down at my desk, and tried to log into the governance portal I'd used for years. The screen loaded, then flashed one line. Access denied. Access denied. 2 words, plain gray text, and a little spinning icon like the system was thinking about whether to let me breathe. I tried again. Same result. I opened my email to check if there was some announcement, some notice, anything that explained why the portal I'd owned for years suddenly treated me like a stranger. Nothing. Then my calendar refreshed, and my stomach dropped. A new meeting invite had appeared overnight. Title, Immediate Update. Attendees, me, Laura, Ben from HR, Derek. Time, in 30 minutes. No agenda, no pretense. I sat there in my desk chair and felt a strange calm settle over me. Not peace, something sharper. Like the moment right before a car crash when you stop hoping it won't happen and just brace. I opened my project notes folder, added a new entry and typed, Portal access denied. Meeting invite labeled immediate update. No notice. Then I took screenshots of everything. The denial screen, the meeting invite, the timestamp. When I walked into the conference room, Derek was already there, arms folded, smile waiting like a mask he could lift on command. Ben's laptop was open. Laura's hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles looked pale. Derek didn't waste time. We've decided to move forward with a formal improvement plan, he said, effective immediately. I didn't react. I didn't give them a facial expression they could write down as hostile. I just said, based on what? Derek slid a packet across the table. It wasn't about my work, not really. It was about my tone. It listed phrases like, not aligned, resistant to change, creates friction, impacts team culture. It included 2 examples of emails where I'd asked for access to meet expectations. It framed my insistence on validation as unwillingness to support. It never mentioned that they had removed my access first. It never mentioned the attestation. It never mentioned compliance, asking why my name was still on controls I no longer had permission to view. I read it slowly, then looked up. This plan doesn't include any objective performance failures, I said. It includes subjective language and selectively quoted emails. Derek's smile tightened. It's not subjective, it's behavior. Ben finally spoke, voice practiced. The goal is to help you be successful in the new model. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I asked the question that matters in real corporate life. Is this plan a step toward termination? Silence. Then Derek said, It's a step toward improvement. That's a yes, dressed in a suit, Laura added softly. We really want you to succeed, but we need flexibility. Flexibility. Again, I nodded once. I'll review it with counsel, I said. Ben's eyes flicked up. Counsel? I'm entitled to review documents before signing, I replied, especially documents that redefine my role and the expectations. Derek leaned forward. Are you refusing to sign? I'm refusing to sign today, I said, until I can verify the statements and the context. Derek exhaled through his nose. This is exactly the resistance we're talking about. And there it was. No matter what I did, they would label it resistance. If I signed, I agreed to their story. If I didn't sign, I proved their story. Either way, they were trying to trap me inside their narrative. So I took the only move left. I made the narrative factual. Before we discuss my behavior, I said, I need an answer to a specific issue. Why was my governance portal access removed this morning? Ben typed something. Laura stared at the table. Derek said, Permissions are being centralized under Kyle's team. So I'm being held accountable for controls I can't access, I said evenly. And you're calling that a behavior problem. Derek's jaw tightened. You're making this adversarial. I looked at him. I'm making it accurate. The meeting ended with Ben sliding a signature page toward me. We need acknowledgement, he said. Not agreement, just acknowledgement. I'd seen that trick before. Acknowledgement becomes consent later when someone needs to argue you accepted the terms. So I wrote one line above the signature box. Acknowledge receipt. I do not agree that this document reflects the full context of tool access and role changes. I will provide written feedback. Then I signed. Derek didn't like that. I could tell by the way he stared at my handwriting. I walked out of the room and returned to my desk. My email was still active. Slack was still active. Just enough access to do work, but not enough access to prove anything. And then the chaos started. Kyle messaged me. Can you jump on a quick call? We have a vendor escalation. I replied, I no longer have access to the vendor governance portal. Please route through the current control owner. Kyle responded, We don't have time for that. The client is furious. So I did what I'd always done. I tried to help. I dialed into the escalation with the client, Kyle, and 2 people from support. I listened to the client explain that a critical approval had stalled. The timeline was tight. They were threatening to pause the contract. Normally I'd open the portal, pull the evidence, identify the blockage, fix it, document it, and send a clean summary. This time I couldn't even see the queue. I asked Kyle, Can you share your screen and show me the approval chain? Kyle hesitated, then shared. The portal was open, the queue was visible. My name was still attached to the control owner field, right there on the screen. And the approval that was stuck? It was waiting on a permission group Kyle's team had created the week before. A gate they'd built, a gate they didn't understand. The client asked, Sharp, why is this assigned to your former manager if he's not allowed to access the system? No one answered for a beat. I could feel Kyle panicking. I could hear it in his breathing. I kept my voice calm. The control owner list has not been updated, I said. Please route this to the current access holder. I'm not authorized. The client didn't like that answer. I don't care who's authorized, he snapped. I care who fixes it. And in that moment, I saw the truth of Derek's plan. They wanted me powerless internally, but responsible externally. A scapegoat with a badge. Kyle tried to fix the gate, clicked the wrong setting, and the queue froze completely. The portal error popped up on screen. The client swore, loudly, After the call, Kyle messaged me privately. "Please don't mention the access thing to anyone. Derek will lose it." I stared at that message like it was written in another language, because it meant Kyle knew exactly what was happening. They thought I was gone. I wasn't. Not yet. I forwarded Kyle's message into my project notes folder and wrote one sentence. "They want me to be accountable for systems they've locked me out of." That afternoon, compliance emailed me directly. Subject, control owner confirmation required. Short message. No emotion, just questions. They wanted to know why the vendor attestation was still linked to me. They wanted to know whether I had signed the annual document. They wanted to know who currently validated the controls. I could almost hear Derek's blood pressure rising from across the building. I replied carefully, "I have not signed the annual attestation because I do not currently have access to validate the required statements. My access was removed on this date. I have requested restoration. Please advise the correct current control owner for validation." I copied Ben from HR, Laura, and Derek. That email did something beautiful in a corporate environment. It created a record that could not be edited by internal politics. Within an hour, Ben called me. "We need to talk," he said, voice tight. "I prefer email," I replied. "Can you step into a room?" he asked. I walked into a small meeting room, and Ben was alone this time. No Derek, no Laura. Just HR, and for the first time his professionalism looked strained. "You're escalating," he said. "I'm answering compliance," I said. "They asked direct questions." Ben swallowed. "We're trying to manage this internally." And that was the moment I realized the whole thing wasn't about me anymore. It was about containment. They had tried to squeeze me out quietly, but by demanding signatures and blocking access, they had dragged compliance into it. Now it wasn't just an HR story. It was a governance story. And governance stories have consequences. Ben leaned closer. "We need you to be flexible here," he said, almost pleading. I looked at him and said the calmest sentence of my life. "I have been flexible for 19 years. Now I am being accurate." Ben didn't respond. He just left the room. And I sat there alone for a minute, listening to the hum of the fluorescent lights, realizing I wasn't scared anymore. I was done. When I returned to my desk, there was a new calendar invite. Title, Administrative Leave. Time, immediately. Attendees, me, HR Director. No Derek listed, but I knew he was behind it. Because companies don't put you on administrative leave to help you. They do it to remove you from the building before you can create any more facts. And the only question left was, would they cut me off before I could finish writing the record? I grabbed my notebook, stood up, and walked toward HR. Calm, measured, because the final act wasn't going to be loud. It was going to be clean. And I was going to make sure it wasn't there clean. When I walked into HR, Ben was already there with a printed sheet in his hands. Laura stood beside him, eyes fixed on a point on the wall, like she couldn't stand to look directly at what they were doing. Ben didn't waste time. "Effective immediately, you're being placed on administrative leave while we review the situation," he said. Review. The most flexible word in corporate language. It can mean anything. It can mean nothing. It can mean, we're buying time. I kept my voice steady. "What situation?" Ben glanced down at the paper, then back up. "Concerns have been raised about alignment, communication, and your ability to support the new operating model." So, tone again. Not results, not performance. Not the fact they'd locked me out of tools and still expected me to sign legal attestations. Just the soft, vague stuff you can't disprove unless you already have the receipts. "I want that in writing," I said. Ben handed me the sheet. One paragraph. No detail. No timeline. No names. Just a statement that I was on leave and expected not to contact coworkers or clients. I read it once, then looked up. "Are you directing me not to respond to compliance if they contact me again?" Ben hesitated. "If compliance contacts you, loop us in." "Compliance already contacted me," I said evenly. They asked who currently validates controls. That's not a culture issue. That's governance. Laura flinched at the word. Ben tried to soften. This is temporary. Then make it specific, I replied. What exactly are you reviewing? Ben's jaw tightened for a second, then he said the truth in the most HR way possible. We're assessing whether continuing employment is a good fit. There it was, the real point. They weren't firing me, but they were removing me from the building, cutting off my access, limiting my ability to write more records, controlling who I could speak to. It was the last squeeze. I nodded once. Understood. Ben added, you'll keep pay during the leave. Pay during leave. A small consolation that also served them. If I panicked and quit now, they could claim I wasn't pressured. They could say, we even paid him while we reviewed. I looked at them both and asked one final question. Is my access being removed today? Ben didn't answer directly. IT will handle logistics. That was a yes. I left HR and walked back to my desk, and every step felt strangely quiet, like the office had already decided I wasn't there. I sat down, opened my laptop, and watched the system collapse in real time. My email logged me out. My VPN disconnected. My internal tools flashed errors, one after another, like doors locking in sequence. Then my phone buzzed, a message from the client who'd escalated the day before. Who is covering this now? We're not getting answers. I stared at it for a full 5 seconds, and then I did the most disciplined thing I'd done in my entire career. I did nothing. I didn't reply, because any reply would become contacting clients during leave. Any attempt to help would become policy violation. They'd been setting the trap for weeks. Now they wanted me to step into it. So I took a screenshot of the client message, saved it to my personal notes, and put my phone down. Before I left the building, I went to the printer near the break room, printed the attestation email chain, the access denial ticket, and compliance's request, and placed them into a folder I'd already prepared at home. I didn't steal anything proprietary, no customer data, no internal systems, just my own communications and policy documents that involved me directly, things any normal person would need if the company tried to rewrite history. Then I walked out. No cardboard box, no escort, no dramatic exit, just a quiet door closing behind 19 years. That night, I met Maya on a video call and told her exactly what happened. She wasn't surprised. This is how they try to end constructive discharge cases, she said. They isolate the employee, control communication, and push for a resignation that looks voluntary. So what do we do? I asked. Maya said, we respond, in writing, calmly. The next morning, she drafted a notice that read like a compliance document, not a complaint. It stated that my working conditions had changed materially. Removal of duties, removal of access required to perform controls, work, imposition of metrics unrelated to responsibilities, location and schedule pressure applied unevenly, and retaliation framed as behavior. It referenced dates, emails, tickets, witnessed meetings. Then it included one line that mattered more than anything else. Any separation would be considered involuntary. We sent it to the company's legal inbox, HR, Laura, and Derek. And then we stopped talking. That's the part people don't understand about this kind of revenge. Revenge isn't yelling. Revenge is refusing to give them a messy story. They wanted me to storm out. They wanted an angry email. They wanted something they could label unprofessional and hang on a file. Instead, they got a timeline. 3 days later, Ben called, not emailed, called, which told me everything. Companies call when they want you to say something that isn't recorded. I didn't answer. Maya returned the call. After that, the tone changed. Suddenly they weren't talking about my alignment. They were talking about resolution. They offered a separation agreement. First offer, small, insulting, written like they expected me to be desperate. Maya rejected it. Second offer, larger, included neutral reference language, included a statement that my departure was not related to misconduct. Maya rejected it again, and this time she pointed directly at the compliance exposure. The demanded attestation without validation access, the outdated control ownership list, the client escalation failure, and the administrative leave imposed immediately after compliance asked questions. A week later, the company made their real offer. Severance aligned with my tenure. Continued health coverage for a fixed period. Neutral reference. A written assurance they would not contest unemployment. And, quietly, an internal correction. My name removed from every control owner list and audit file. They didn't admit wrongdoing. They didn't apologize. They just paid to stop the problem from growing. And I signed. Not because I forgave them, because I got what mattered. My record stayed clean. My exit was documented as involuntary, and their attempt to force me out voluntarily failed. A month after I left, a former coworker texted me 2 sentences. Derek's gone. Compliance tore them apart. No details. No fireworks. Just the corporate version of karma. Someone disappears from the org chart and people stop saying his name out loud. The strangest part wasn't the satisfaction. It was the quiet that came after. For weeks, I'd lived with my nervous system wired like an alarm, waiting for another policy change, another check-in, another trap disguised as support. Then one morning in my new job, my manager asked me a simple question. Do you have what you need to do this correctly? And I almost didn't know how to answer, because I'd forgotten what it felt like to be treated like a professional instead of a liability to be managed. I told him the truth. Yes. He nodded and said, Good. We don't do games here. I walked back to my desk and felt something in my chest loosen for the first time in months. 19 years didn't end with a firing. It ended with pressure, with access removals and polite threats, with a performance plan built out of the word tone. They thought they could squeeze me out quietly and keep the story clean. What they didn't understand was this. I spent 19 years doing compliance work. I know the difference between a story and a record. And when they tried to erase me, I didn't fight with emotion. I fought with documentation. So I left with my name intact. I landed on my feet. And the people who built the trap stayed inside it. Because in the end, the only thing louder than power is proof.